So as I was growing up and realising that I was trans, it was really hard to even just find that word and have a way of talking about it in my own head, let alone trying to find the confidence to talk to anybody else about how I was feeling.
James Morton had to provide medical evidence and show he'd lived as a man for 2 years to legally change his gender and get a new birth certificate. The Scottish Government wants to make it easier for other transgender people to do the same, with a system of self-declaration.
Trans people's rights to access services have been in place for almost a decade, and trans people have been using those services for many decades longer. We're just slightly more in number, but we're still a tiny number of people. So it's really positive if the government will remove all of this needless, intrusive evidence about your psychiatric history, about sort of whether you have access to hormones or surgeries. It'd be much more dignified, and then a lot more trans people would be able to feel that they could face going through it.
I don't think that self-identification is good. I don't think that just ticking a box is good enough to change your legal sex. I don't think that anyone should be able to change their legal sex, to be honest, and I think it's totally unnecessary.
Meghan Murphy is visiting Edinburgh from Canada to warn against self-declaration and what she sees as a threat to women's rights. Billed as a radical feminist and banned from Twitter for alleged transphobia, she's hitting out at her treatment in the media back home.
So different compared to Canada. At this point I sort of just wonder if Canadian sites or Canadian reporters are too embarrassed to correct their mistake of ignoring this whole issue. Of course, I don't think that males who, want to wear women's clothing should be discriminated against or harassed. Like, of course, they should be protected from discrimination and harassment, but it's not necessary to pretend that they're literally female. And it's not possible to change sex, no matter what you do, no matter how many surgeries you have, you don't literally change sex. So, women and girls are really kind of being walked over. Their concerns about safety aren't being respected at all.
I don't really care what anybody says about me. I've always been a feminist. I've always been supportive of gay rights, right back in the 1980s when a lot of people weren't. It's about making sure the most vulnerable people are protected.
Joan MacAlpine is the SNP MSP who invited her to speak at Holyrood, a vocal critic of her own party's policy, and she says she's not alone.
Obviously there was a letter that was signed by a number of very senior SNP politicians that said, let's call a halt on this, let's not rush into this. If women don't want to share their spaces with fully intact men, people who look at like men in every respect, then they shouldn't be forced to by senior politicians or senior feminists who run publicly funded organisations.
The Equalities Secretary, Shirley-Anne Somerville, says she'll seek to address concerns and unite Parliament. Despite signs of divisions in her own party, she says reforming the law remains a priority. Sandy Brindley is on the front line of services for vulnerable people, services already accessed by transgender people.
I understand that people have fears about abusive men using the fact we're trans-inclusive to try and come into our services and harm women. And really what I'd like to stress is we've been trans-inclusive for over 10 years in Scotland. That has never happened. I think trans women are potentially very vulnerable. If they've been raped, they deserve services like anyone else. And I do not think that the actions of some abusive men should be used as a way to try and stop trans women accessing our services. We have very clear safety procedures in place.
We're still not seen as just ordinary members of society yet, and that's where I hope we'll get to, is where the fact that someone's trans isn't the be-all and end-all. It's not the only thing that matters, and that we're seen as just the same cross-section of society as everybody else.